It was late in the night, and I was driving home from a friend's house. It was raining heavily, but the roads were empty, and I was enjoying the peacefulness of the drive. However, that peace was soon ruined when I noticed a car in my rear-view mirror approaching the back of me. At first I thought it was just another driver on the road, but as I continued to drive, I realized that this car wasn't taking any opportunity to pass me. It was tailing me, driving dangerously close, then easing off for a minute or two, and then accelerating back to me. I tried to speed up and not freak out, but the car kept following me, no matter which direction I took. I could hear my heartbeat over everything else, as my mind filled with all kinds of horror scenarios. As I drove on, attempting to lose my tail, I began to realize that I was completely lost. I had never been on this deserted road before, and the darkness made it difficult to get any kind of bearing. The car behind me continued to follow, and I felt like I was being herded. I didn't know what sort of crazy person I was dealing with here, or even where I was now, but I knew that I had to do something before it was too late. Suddenly, I saw the lights of a restaurant up ahead, and I accelerated to pull in. I hoped that the car following me would keep going, but to my horror, they pulled in behind me. I sat there in shock as the other car parked up. It felt like an eternity before the driver of the car got out and approached my window. I could see their silhouette through the rain, and even that was enough to scare me half to death. I rolled down my window a crack, just enough to hear what they had to say. "Hey, sorry to scare you like that," the driver said, their voice muffled by the rain. "I saw you were driving alone, and I wanted to make sure you were okay." I didn't believe them for a second, but I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to tell them to leave me alone, to get back in their car and drive away, but I was too scared to speak. The driver must have realized that I wasn't going to respond, because they just continued talking. "I was just worried about you. It's dangerous out here, especially for a young woman like yourself." That was the final straw. I knew that this person was talking absolute BS, and clearly up to no good. I needed to get out of there. Just as I was putting my car into gear, I noticed another man waving as the bell of the restaurant door rang out behind him. As he quickly began to make his way in my direction, the car that had been following me roared its engine and skidded off into the dark. The man who had just run over stood back a meter or so from my car, as if he knew to give me space, and asked if I was okay through my slightly open window. He was the owner of the restaurant, and said that he had seen the other man approaching my car and wanted to make sure everything was okay. I was lost for words, and I couldn't help but just start crying on the spot, partly out of being so afraid, and partly out of just sheer joy that someone had come to help. I got myself together and managed to explain to the man what had happened, and that I was now totally lost. He locked up and ironically told me to follow him back to the freeway, which turned out was only about 15 minutes away, where I could easily find my way back in familiar surroundings. I'm eternally grateful for that man's kindness and quick thinking. There's some amazing people out there. Unfortunately, there's clearly some bad ones too. As my partner Lisa and I cruised down the winding moonlit road in our beloved old Dodge van, the night felt alive with possibility. Our stereo blasted classic rock tunes as we rambled through the quiet countryside. The windows were rolled down, and the scent of the night air and distant bonfires wafted in. We'd always loved these spontaneous late-night drives, letting the road take us wherever it pleased. As we approached a lonely stretch of highway, we noticed a figure up ahead, thumb outstretched. Lisa, always the more compassionate of the two of us, urged me to pull over and offer a ride. "Could be someone who needs help," she said. I couldn't argue with that, so I eased the van to the side of the road. The hitchhiker emerged from the shadows, a tall and thin silhouette. As he drew nearer, we got our first glimpse of his face. His eyes looked sunken and vacant, as if he hadn't slept in weeks. He wore a tattered dark jacket that seemed out of place on this warm summer night. "Hey there," Lisa greeted him with a friendly smile. "Need a lift?" The hitchhiker nodded, but didn't say a word. He climbed into the back seat, and the air grew heavy with an uncomfortable silence. I shot Lisa a puzzled look, but she simply shrugged it off, trying to make small talk with our silent guest. We drove for a couple of miles, the hitchhiker never uttering a single word. His presence was starting to unnerve us. Our attempts at conversation grew strained, and a really bad feeling settled like a fog in the van. As we reached a desolate stretch of road, the hitchhiker suddenly pointed to a turning ahead. It was an obscure path, almost hidden by overgrown vegetation. Lisa asked him if he wanted to get off there, but he just nodded again, more eagerly this time. I hesitated, but turned into the dirt road, the van's headlights slicing through the darkness. Panic started to claw at my chest, but I was frantically trying to think of the best course of action, and didn't want to frighten Lisa. As we reached a small clearing, and the hitchhiker told us to stop, I gladly complied as he got out, disappearing without a word of thanks or a farewell. As he vanished into the night, Lisa and I looked at each other, bewildered and a little shaken. We turned the van around and drove back to the main road. The encounter with the hitchhiker, now just a bizarre memory. We kept talking about it on the drive home, and back in the safety of our own company, even started to laugh and make jokes about it, just writing the whole thing off to some weirdo being let out at night. As we got back to our place, we parked the van in the driveway and jumped out. My partner looked around and noticed a mark on the back corner of the van above the bumper. We know every inch of that van, and it definitely wasn't there before we left. I switched on the torch on my phone to get a closer look, when I noticed it was actually a yellow sticker with a small X marked on it. I carefully peeled the sticker off and we went inside, tired and a bit confused from the evening's events. In the morning, as I was having my coffee, I was speaking to a buddy over text, telling him about our weird drive the night before. I almost forgot to mention the sticker we found on the van, but when I did, my friend just replied, "Oh shit." He went on to explain that there had been a spate of thefts and break-ins, where vehicles and homes were being marked this way to indicate a target for a robbery. Apparently the stickers are colour-coded, which indicate some sort of information about the victim to the perpetrators. For example, if it's somebody living alone, or if there's an animal at the property, or if a vehicle is alarmed. Apparently there was even cases of pets being stolen from marked addresses. After I got off the phone, I explained everything I just heard to my partner Lisa. We could only conclude what we already knew, that we shouldn't have picked up that mad hitchhiker from the night before, and that he must have had something to do with marking our van. We decided not to leave anything to chance and risk anything happening to our van or our home. We took a trip to the hardware store and got everything we needed to put our minds at ease. I installed floodlights on sensors to the front of the house and an annoyingly loud alarm in my van. My partner and I are also now talking about getting a Rottweiler pup for some extra security, and of course as a buddy for our drives at night. It was early December, and the rain was pouring down as I set out to visit my dad's house. The afternoon had already descended into darkness, and I had a long drive ahead of me. The rhythmic patter of rain on my windshield and the hum of the engine were my only companions on the desolate road. I hadn't seen my dad in months, and I wanted to make the journey to his place before the holidays. As I ventured further into the night, the rain seemed to intensify, creating a blurry curtain on the slick black road. My phone buzzed with a message from Dad, asking about my estimated arrival time. I replied with a message that I hoped I'd be there in an hour. Just as I began to relax into the monotony of the drive, the engine sputtered and coughed, and the car shuddered to a halt. Panic surged through me as I tried to restart it, but the engine remained lifeless. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere, the rain coming down on the roof like a drum solo. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone to call for a tow, but to my dismay, I had no signal. It was a total nightmare scenario, stuck in the dead of night, with the rain showing no sign of letting up. I decided to step out of the car and pop the hood, hoping it was just a minor issue I could fix. The rain assaulted me the moment I stepped outside, and I cursed my bad luck. I fumbled with the latch and raised the hood, peering inside. Nothing seemed amiss to my untrained eye. The relentless rain continued to pour down, just making the situation feel 10 times worse. Stranded on a desolate road with no phone signal, I was left with no option but to abandon my car and walk back a few miles to the last town I'd passed. I locked the vehicle and began walking along the wet and empty road. After what felt like miles of lonely trekking, I heard a low sound breaking through the noise of the rain. I looked up to see distant headlights approaching. I stepped to the side of the road and waved my arms, relieved when I noticed the car slowing down as it approached. The car stopped a few meters ahead of me, with the headlights blinding me. I waited for someone to get out, but the car just sat there with the engine running for what seemed like forever. Confused, I stepped out to approach the car, but as I moved forward, the car revved its engine and sped off down the road, leaving me back in the darkness. What the hell just happened? Who would just leave someone in this situation? Disappointed, I resumed my miserable walk in search of help, trying to rationalize that strange encounter. Most reasonable explanation I could think of was perhaps the person was freaked out by me and didn't feel safe giving me a ride alone. But then why stop? A few moments later, the distant sound of an engine again, but this time coming in the other direction. I stepped aside again, but I could hear the car was driving fast. As it got closer, the driver sounded the horn and kept it pressed as they drove past at speed, flashing their headlights. I was instantly petrified. I was sure it was the car that had stopped earlier and could now only assume that they were trying to mess with me for some reason. I doubled my pace, following the direction of the passing car, when I spotted a faint glow in the distance. It was the feeble light of a truck stop just off the side of the road. I pushed forward, my soaking trainers getting heavier and slowing me down. The open sign at the truck stop swung in the rain-soaked breeze, and the neon lights inside created an inviting aura. As I pushed open the door, the warm smell of coffee and the soft murmur of hushed conversations enveloped me. I made my way to the counter and explained my predicament to the waitress and asked if they had a phone I could use to call for help. She pointed me to the landline phone at the far end of the counter, and just as I was about to dial for a number, an elderly man sitting at the counter introduced himself as George and offered to take a look at my car once he finished his coffee. We jumped in his truck and set off to look at my abandoned car. On the way we made general conversation about the area. He was a really kind man who had lived there for decades, so he seemed to know everything about the place. We arrived at my car, and as George was taking a look, I mentioned the car that had stopped as I was walking. He looked up from the hood of his car with a serious look on his face, eyebrows raised. He told me that there had been several cases of people going missing in the area over the past few years, and that nobody had ever been caught. I tried to not let on, but I felt a chill to my core. Had I been targeted in my vulnerable predicament as the next potential victim? My car spluttered back to life within a few minutes of George's inspection. He wouldn't accept any money, and I couldn't thank him enough for everything, possibly even saving my life. I continued on my journey to my dad's house, messaging him on the way to explain the lateness. The rain had transformed into a light drizzle, and the road ahead seemed less foreboding. The evening with my dad was warm and filled with laughter. We shared stories and caught up on life and enjoyed tons of food together. As I wound down for the night, I couldn't help but think back to that strange encounter and the gravity of the situation I was in. I'll never forget George's help and the chance to continue my journey safely.